Hey there, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into a topic that's hot, controversial, and oh so relevant: free speech and censorship. What does it actually mean to have the freedom to speak? Where does that freedom cross the line into censorship? And who's drawing that line anyway? In a world where everyone has a platform, these questions are more important than ever. So, let's unravel the layers of free speech and censorship and figure out why they're so complicated and why they matter to each and every one of us. First things first, what exactly is free speech? Free speech is the idea that people have the right to express themselves without government interference. This concept has been around for ages, but it really took shape in the 18th century when philosophers were laying down ideas for modern democracy. In fact, free speech is a cornerstone of democracy. It's the foundation that allows us to exchange ideas, criticize our leaders, and push for social change. But here's the twist. Free speech doesn't mean absolute freedom to say anything and everything. There are limits. And that's where the waters start to get murky. Think of free speech as a broad river with certain banks and boundaries that keep it flowing in a safe direction. Free speech is usually thought of as a fundamental human right, protected by laws and constitutions. In the United States, for example, it's the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. Pretty cool, right? It was written as a safeguard so people could speak out without fear of persecution. But even in countries where free speech is legally protected, it's not completely unlimited. There are restrictions in place usually to prevent things like inciting violence, defamation, or spreading dangerous lies. Let's take an example. If someone shouts "fire" in a crowded theater, causing a panic, they could be held responsible. Why? Because even though they have a right to speak, that speech created a direct and immediate harm. Or think about hate speech. Some countries consider this kind of speech to be so harmful that it's actually illegal. It's fascinating how each society decides where to draw these lines, isn't it? But it also leads to some tricky questions. Like, who decides what counts as dangerous or harmful speech? Now, let's talk about censorship. If free speech is about the freedom to express, then censorship is about limiting or restricting that expression. In a perfect world, censorship would only be used in rare cases, like to protect people from harm or violence. But as you probably guessed, things aren't always that simple. Censorship can take many forms. Sometimes it's the government banning a book or a movie. Other times it's a social media platform removing a post. And here's where things get interesting. The reasons for censorship can be well-intentioned, like reducing hate speech, or not so great, like silencing criticism. A classic example of censorship in history is book banning. Some books have been banned for political reasons, like Animal Farm by George Orwell, which criticizes totalitarian regimes. Others have been banned for social reasons, like To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which tackles racial issues. Each time a book is banned, it raises questions about whether censorship is actually protecting society or just limiting important conversations. Books, movies, music, the internet, almost anything we use to express ideas can be censored in some way, and every instance of censorship comes with its own set of debates. One of the biggest battlegrounds for free speech and censorship today is social media. Social media platforms are like the modern-day public square, a place where people come together to share ideas, debate, and connect. But here's the catch. Social media platforms are owned by private companies, and these companies set their own rules for what's allowed. They can and do remove content that they believe violates their policies. This might be hate speech, violent threats, misinformation, or even things that might just be controversial. For example, think about misinformation. In recent years, social media has been flooded with misleading information on everything from health to elections. Some platforms have tried to combat this by labeling, limiting, or removing misinformation. But this raises a tricky question. When does fighting misinformation become censorship? And who decides what counts as misinformation? This balance between keeping people informed and allowing freedom of expression is incredibly difficult to achieve. And this struggle doesn't just exist online, it reflects our larger debate about what should and shouldn't be allowed. Another fascinating aspect of this debate is the concept of cancel culture. Cancel culture is when a person or company is canceled by the public, often because of something they said or did that people find offensive. Supporters of cancel culture see it as a way to hold people accountable for their actions, especially if those actions are harmful. But critics argue that cancel culture has become a form of mob justice, where people are silenced or canceled without a fair chance to explain or defend themselves. It's a controversial topic, and it blurs the line between accountability and censorship. So, when does canceling someone go too far? And how does it impact our understanding of free speech? Let's not forget that the right to free speech also includes the right to protest. Protests are a way for people to come together and make their voices heard, to demand change when they feel something is wrong. From civil rights marches to climate strikes, protests have been a powerful force throughout history. But even protests are sometimes censored, either through laws that limit where or when people can gather, or through police action. And here's where things get complicated. While protests can push for social progress, they can also be disruptive. So once again, society has to decide where to draw the line. Here's another mind-bending layer. Censorship can sometimes work in unexpected ways. Did you know that in some cases, censorship can actually boost the popularity of whatever is being censored? There's even a term for this, the Streisand effect. It's named after the time singer Barbra Streisand tried to prevent photos of her house from being published. Her attempt to censor the images actually made them go viral. So, sometimes when something is censored, it gets even more attention than it would have otherwise. The internet is full of examples like this, and it shows how unpredictable censorship can be. At the end of the day, free speech and censorship aren't just about legal definitions or rules. They're about values, what we as a society think is worth protecting, and what we believe should be restricted. And these values are constantly evolving. What was acceptable or unacceptable 100 years ago might look completely different today. Our world is more connected than ever, and that means we're constantly being exposed to new ideas, some of which we may not agree with or even find offensive. The challenge is finding a way to coexist in this landscape of diverse opinions without resorting to extreme censorship or allowing harmful speech to go unchecked. Now, you might be wondering, where do we go from here? How can we find a balance between protecting free speech and preventing harmful content? Well, there's no simple answer, but there are a few things that could help. For starters, education plays a huge role. By teaching people how to evaluate information critically and understand different perspectives, we can build a society that's less vulnerable to harmful ideas. We can also encourage open dialogue, yes, even with people we disagree with, so that we can understand where others are coming from. Another approach is transparency. If platforms and governments are clear about why they're censoring certain content, it can build trust and allow people to understand the reasoning. There's a big difference between censorship that's done in secret and censorship that's done with clear, understandable guidelines. At the same time, there has to be room for accountability so that those in power don't misuse censorship to silence valid criticism. Ultimately, free speech and censorship will likely remain a balancing act, a push and pull between freedom and responsibility. In a world as complex and diverse as ours, it's almost impossible to draw a line that will make everyone happy. But by keeping the conversation going, by challenging our assumptions, and by staying engaged, we can navigate this tricky terrain together. So, what do you think? Is censorship necessary to protect society, or does it do more harm than good? Can we ever find the perfect balance? Let us know in the comments. And remember, when it comes to free speech, everyone has a voice and every voice matters.